Human evolution as we know it has resulted in Homo sapiens becoming the dominant species on the planet. But what if evolution had taken a different path? If our ancestors had made different choices or faced different conditions, how would our appearance and behavior have changed? Let's explore some alternative scenarios for human evolution. Could we have been denser and stronger? If human evolution had followed a path of increased development of physical strength and endurance, our appearance could have been dramatically different. Instead of focusing on developing intelligence and social skills, we might have become more like powerful giants. For example, if our ancestors had continued to use their physical strength to survive in harsher environments, we might have had a much more massive physique, with stronger bones and more muscle mass. An example of this pathway would be the evolution of Neanderthals, who, despite having smaller brains, were very physically developed and had high endurance. This could have led to the evolution of our species being dominated by physical strength rather than mental ability. We might have become large, heavy creatures with large jaws and teeth, which would have been an adaptation to the need to chew tough food, as in some modern animals, such as hippopotamuses. Also, perhaps we would have had thicker skin or hairy bodies, which would have helped us survive in extreme climates such as ice ages. Alternative brain evolution. Less or more intelligence. Perhaps our brains could have evolved in a different way than we tend to think, and focused on completely different aspects than what gave rise to the intelligence that created civilizations and technology. If the development of intelligence had not been such a priority, we could have been creatures with smaller brains but with very different cognitive abilities. For example, intelligence might have been directed toward other kinds of adaptations. Acute senses such as sight or smell might have evolved at a higher level. Suppose our evolution had followed a path in which sensory abilities would have played a dominant role. We might have become beings with more developed senses such as smell, hearing, and sight. Our brains might have remained relatively small, but we would have become masters at perceiving the world around us through these senses. We could learn to sense the slightest changes in the atmosphere, see a wider range of colors, or hear sounds that are inaccessible to us today. There is also a possible scenario in which our brains could evolve to exponentially increase empathy and social connections, leading to entirely new ways of human interaction. We could be more social beings who build their communities not based on intelligence, but on deep emotional interaction and understanding. Hypothetical evolution with 2 pairs of limbs? From an anatomical perspective, an interesting evolutionary direction could have been the development of additional limbs, which is sometimes discussed in scientific fantasies and hypotheses. There are theories suggesting that if evolution had gone down the path of creating more multifunctional creatures, our ancestors could have developed additional limbs to perform tasks such as foraging for food, construction, or defense. For example, 2 extra limbs could have given us the ability to deftly use tools, or even develop new types of communication beyond language. In some hypothetical scenarios, we could be creatures with 4 arms, giving us unimaginable dexterity and the ability to manipulate the world around us in more complex ways. Evolution without fire. How would we have survived? If our ancestors had not learned to use fire, they would have been forced to adapt to colder conditions, perhaps evolving into creatures with warm, dense layers of fat, like some northern populations such as the Eskimos. Perhaps we could have evolved large noses to warm the air and long woolen coats to protect us from the cold. There is also the possibility that evolution would have followed a path of increasing metabolism, allowing us to maintain our body temperature without using external heat sources. Evolution in isolated ecosystems. What if we were marine creatures? What if human evolution took a path in which our ancestors did not settle on land, but evolved in a marine environment? This could have led to a very different anatomy. For example, we might have had more adapted fins instead of legs and gills for breathing underwater. Our bodies could have been covered with protective scales or fat to swim efficiently in water. In addition, evolution in aquatic environments could have resulted in our eyes becoming more adapted to poor light conditions, and our brains evolving to orient ourselves in 3-dimensional environments. The possibility of underwater communities could lead to very different social structures, modes of communication, and even interactions with other marine creatures. Adapting to life in other climates. If our evolution had taken place in conditions of perpetual ice or hot deserts, our appearance and abilities might have evolved for these extreme conditions. For example, to live in Arctic conditions, we might have developed thicker layers of blubber and protective fur like modern bears and northern peoples. For desert life, taller bodies for better cooling, and developed kidneys to store water and minimize water loss. Adaptation to extreme climates, survival in cold and heat, animals in conditions of glacial epochs or Arctic zones. If evolution had taken place under conditions of long ice ages, where cold and snow would have dominated the planet, then we could have seen a completely different flora and fauna than those that exist now. For example, mammals could be significantly larger and have thick fur to retain heat. Imagine huge animals like modern bears or woolly rhinoceroses, but even more massive, with a thick layer of subcutaneous fat to insulate from the cold. Marine mammals could be adapted to cold waters, for example, with a dense layer of fat, like modern whales and seals, but their size could be significantly larger in order to effectively swim in cold waters and search for food. Predators such as lions and tigers could adapt to life in snowy and icy conditions. Instead of the usual stripes or spots, their skins could be white to hide in snowy landscapes. They could have become more massive with elongated paws and powerful claws for hunting large prey such as woolly mammoths. In addition, we could observe larger and slower animals such as Paleolithic giants or hypothetical versions of giant deer with wide horns for survival in cold, snowy plains, animals in conditions of heat and deserts. If humanity's evolution had taken place in deserts and hot ecosystems, animals could have adapted to survive in extreme heat and water scarcity. Mammals in these conditions could become desert giants, like the idea of giant lizards crawling on sand dunes. They could have had thick, almost leathery skin to prevent water loss. These giants could resemble crocodiles or lizards, but be an order of magnitude larger, adapted to life in hot sands. Birds such as ostriches or eagles could evolve into larger forms, with thin and tall legs to aid in rapid movement across sandy plains. Plants in such conditions could be so strong that they would have a huge rhizome, which would allow them to reach water from great depths. We could see giant cacti or even trees that would literally hold the entire water supply for years to come. Evolution without large predators. How would the animal world change? If evolution had followed the path of creating a more balanced ecosystem, where there would have been significantly fewer predators, animals could have become more widespread and friendly. Evolution could lead to a world with greater harmony between plants and herbivores, animals without predators, developing protection and survival strategies. Herbivores could become so large that their size would be sufficient to defend against any potential threats. Imagine giant savanna elephants or hippos that would have reinforced armor to protect themselves from predators like modern turtles, only in much larger forms. The social structures of animals could be more complex, where all individuals in the herd protect each other. Perhaps we would even observe in birds and mammals the evolution of multi-layered social groups in which all animals cooperate for survival. The development of unusual life forms and organs. If animal evolution had followed the path of developing unusual forms and organs, we might have encountered a world where organisms developed unusual adaptations to survive in the most extreme environments. Unusual animal forms and abilities. Bioluminescence could become common in many creatures, as in some marine animals such as luminous jellyfish. This would allow animals to use light for defense against predators or to attract food, especially in dark or murky waters. Molecules and cells could evolve to use new sources of energy in this way. Imagine animals that could utilize solar energy through their skin, like plants, or even be capable of chemical reactions to survive in places where light is absent, such as deep ocean trenches. Some animals could have developed secondary sensory organs, such as echolocation or thermosensitivity, as in modern bats and snakes. These organs would allow them to sense the slightest changes in their environment, such as temperatures or vibrations, giving them an advantage in finding food or avoiding threats. Ecosystems without humans. how would the balance of nature change? If humans did not become the dominant species on the planet, this would lead to more harmonious ecosystems, where the balance between animals and plants would not be disturbed by human activities. Under such conditions, evolution could have headed toward more sustainable ecosystems where plants and animals would live in balance without being overly affected by human activity, like deforestation or water pollution. Animals could live in large herds or populations where there would be no threats, such as man-made disasters. Perhaps evolution would have resulted in more species perfectly adapted to their environment.